Priori spiritual awakening, spiritual eligibility in Upanishadic thought. The Upanishads present an uncompromising vision of human life. Human birth is a rare opportunity meant for the awakening of intelligence and the realization of truth. But the Upanishads also make something equally clear. Spiritual awakening does not occur accidentally. It requires specific inner conditions. Spiritual eligibility follows a natural order, a chain of development. When this chain is broken, awakening becomes impossible. When it is completed, awakening becomes possible. At the beginning of this chain stands a fundamental principle. Spiritual awakening requires inner independence. Where subservient dependence dominates, awakening cannot begin. The root. Subservient dependence. The Katha Upanishad 1.2.5 describes the ordinary condition of humanity. Living in ignorance, yet believing themselves wise, people wander about deluded, like the blind led by the blind. Most people live without true understanding while believing themselves knowledgeable. They follow one another and remain psychologically dependent on external authority. They attach themselves to powerful individuals, institutions, or systems, believing these will provide security. But this dependence is the first obstacle to awakening. The Katha Upanishad 1.2.23 declares, "This self is not attained by the weak nor by the careless." Dependence weakens the individual inwardly. It prevents the development of discrimination, the ability to distinguish the eternal from the transient. All external power is temporary. Whoever depends on it lives in uncertainty. True security lies only in the self. Subservient dependence therefore represents not merely social weakness but spiritual ignorance. The consequence: loss of genuine values. Dependence leads inevitably to the erosion of values. Values require inner independence. They require a center of judgment that stands beyond approval or disapproval. The dependent person does not possess such a center. Right and wrong become determined by external authority rather than inner understanding. The Isha Upanishad 9-11 gives a profound warning. Into darkness enter those who follow ignorance. Into greater darkness enter those who cling to knowledge alone. Knowledge without ethical grounding leads to confusion. But the dependent person never develops true ethical grounding at all. Their values remain borrowed and conditional. When values demand sacrifice, dependence chooses safety instead. The result is inner instability. The result: bondage to sensory craving. Without inner values, restraint becomes impossible. The Katha Upanishad 1.3.3-4 describes the human condition through the image of a chariot. The self is the lord of the chariot. The body is the chariot. The intellect is the charioteer. The mind is the reins. The senses are the horses. If the intellect is weak and the mind unsteady, the senses run uncontrolled. The dependent individual lacks the discriminating intellect required to guide the senses. Having always looked outside for direction, they possess no stable inner guidance. The Mundaka Upanishad 1.2.10 describes such individuals. Deluded, considering rituals and works as the highest good, they know nothing beyond. Without inner stability, sensory pleasure becomes the primary refuge from anxiety. Excitement and gratification substitute for peace. But sensory pleasure cannot satisfy the deeper hunger for truth. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 4.4.22 describes the realized person as inwardly fulfilled and free from restlessness. The dependent person never reaches this state because their attention remains directed outward. The final block: inadaptability to higher consciousness. This chain of dependence reaches its final consequence. the inability to adapt to higher consciousness. The Chandogya Upanishad 7.23.1 declares, "The infinite alone is happiness. There is no happiness in the finite." Spiritual awakening requires expansion beyond narrow aims and familiar comforts. But expansion requires courage, and courage requires inner grounding. The dependent individual cannot easily release familiar securities or sensory comforts. Without inner stability, higher awareness appears threatening rather than liberating. Adaptation to higher consciousness requires trust in one's own discernment, willingness to release familiar pleasures, courage to stand inwardly alone. Without these qualities, awakening remains out of reach. The warning of the Pingala Upanishad. The Pingala Upanishad makes this principle unmistakably clear. Even extreme austerities cannot produce awakening without inner transformation. Even extensive study cannot produce realization without direct insight. Mechanical effort cannot replace inner awakening. The text compares misguided effort to a starving man striking the air. Effort without nourishment. Spiritual transformation requires inward realization, not outward performance.